The starship Cora Prime hovered silently in the darkness of space, its sleek silver frame reflecting the light of a distant sun. Inside, Kathiri, a young scholar of the Ticora species, stood before a massive viewing screen. Her black, pupilless eyes studied the blue and green planet below. Earth. "This is where I must go," she asked, her voice calm and calculated. Beside her, Ambassador Veruk, an older Ticora with pale silver skin and long, delicate fingers, gave a small nod. "Yes, Kathiri, you have been chosen for the cultural exchange. You will observe the humans, learn their ways, and report back to us." Kathiri did not question the assignment. She was a scholar, trained in logic and observation. However, she found the mission unnecessary. The Ticora were a highly advanced species, known for their intelligence and order. They had achieved space travel long before humans even understood the concept of electricity. What could they possibly learn from a species still driven by emotion and instinct? Still, she was a loyal scholar. She would do her duty. A soft mechanical voice spoke over the ship's intercom. "Shuttle to Earth is ready for departure." Kathiri exhaled softly. "I will not fail my people." With careful steps, she entered the shuttle, her mind focused on the task ahead. Arrival on Earth. The descent through Earth's atmosphere was smoother than Kathiri expected. As the shuttle landed in a secure facility, she took a moment to compose herself. The Ticora had studied Earth's data, but now she would see humans up close. As the door hissed open, warm air rushed in. The scent of plants, soil, and something unknown filled her senses. It was different from the sterile, metallic air of Ticora ships. A group of humans stood waiting. Among them was Dr. Elias Carter, a middle-aged scientist with gray hair and sharp brown eyes, and his wife, Maria Carter, a linguist specializing in extraterrestrial communication. Elias stepped forward, extending his hand. "Welcome to Earth, Kathiri." She blinked at his hand, confused. "What is this gesture?" Maria chuckled. "It's a handshake, a greeting among humans." Kathiri hesitated before cautiously extending her own hand. Elias gently shook it, and she felt the warmth of his skin. Ticora only touched each other during formal ceremonies or medical procedures. This casual physical contact was strange. "You must be tired after your journey," Maria said kindly. "Let's take you to your quarters." Kathiri nodded, silently processing her first direct experience with human behavior. First impressions. The facility where she would stay was modest by Ticora standards. Simple furniture, warm lighting, and personal decorations. Humans seemed to favor individuality, unlike the uniform efficiency of Ticora structures. As she settled in, Elias and Maria explained their world. They spoke of Earth's history, cultures, and diversity. Humans were not a single, united species, but rather a collection of many different societies, each with its own beliefs and traditions. "How do you maintain order?" Kathiri asked. Elias smiled. "Sometimes we don't, but we learn, we grow, we compromise." This answer puzzled her. The Ticora valued order above all. Chaos was a weakness, and yet humans embraced it. As the evening passed, Maria placed a cup in front of her. "This is tea, a human custom." Kathiri cautiously took a sip. It was warm with a hint of sweetness, not unpleasant. Maria smiled. "We share food as a way of bonding." Another strange custom. Ticora ate alone, efficiently, without conversation. Everything about humans seemed illogical, a confusing species. As night fell, Kathiri stood by the window, looking at the vibrant city lights in the distance. Humans were not as simple as she had assumed. They were unpredictable, emotional, and incredibly different from the Ticora. But for the first time, she felt a spark of something new, curiosity. Perhaps this mission would be more interesting than she had expected. Kathiri spent her first full day on Earth observing humans. She watched how they moved, how they spoke, and most strangely, how they expressed emotions so freely. The Ticora did not waste time on meaningless interactions. They spoke only when necessary, focusing on logic and efficiency. Humans, on the other hand, talked constantly, even when they had nothing important to say. At breakfast, Maria smiled at Elias and said, "Good morning, love." Elias smiled back. "Morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well?" Maria nodded. "I had a strange dream, but it was nice." Kathiri frowned. "Why do you share unnecessary details? The quality of sleep is a personal matter. Should it not be discussed only when relevant?" Elias chuckled. "Humans like to connect with each other. It's not just about information. It's about feeling close." "Feeling close," Kathiri repeated, puzzled. "But you already know each other. Why must you reaffirm your bond daily?" Maria laughed. "Because it makes us happy." Kathiri had no response to that. Happiness was not a measurable outcome in Ticora society. It had no purpose. Yet for humans, it seemed to be a priority. A walk through the city. Later that day, Elias and Maria took Kathiri to a nearby city. She had studied human architecture before, but seeing it in person was different. The streets were filled with movement, people walking, laughing, talking. Vehicles rushed past. Bright lights flashed from screens displaying advertisements and entertainment. Kathiri's keen eyes studied every detail. Humans walked in groups, some holding hands, some hugging. Friends patted each other on the back. Children ran toward their parents, embracing them with joy. The constant physical contact was unsettling. Did humans lack personal space? "Why do they touch each other so often?" she asked. Maria smiled. "It's a way to show care. Touch is important for humans." Kathiri shook her head. "Unnecessary. Verbal confirmation should be enough." Elias chuckled. "For us, words alone aren't always enough. Sometimes, a simple touch says more." Kathiri filed the information away, but it still did not make sense. An unexpected sight. As they walked through a quiet park, Kathiri noticed a young human couple sitting on a bench. The male had his arm around the female, and they were talking softly. Then, suddenly, the female pressed her lips against his. Kathiri froze. Her entire body stiffened in shock. What had she just witnessed? Is that a form of feeding?" she asked hesitantly. Maria let out a laugh. No, that's a kiss. It's a way humans show affection." Kathiri's eyes widened. Affection. Through direct contact with the mouth. The Ticora had nothing similar. Physical contact was rare in their culture, reserved for necessary situations like medical treatment. This was illogical, inefficient, and completely unnecessary. Humans willingly placed their faces against each other. She asked in disbelief. Elias smiled. "Yes, and not just faces. Some humans hug, hold hands, or even rest their heads on each other. It makes us feel safe and loved." Kathiri struggled to process this. "You require physical confirmation of emotional bonds." Maria nodded. "For us, emotions are powerful. They help us connect, trust, and support one another." Kathiri felt a strange sensation in her mind, something she had never experienced before. It was not confusion exactly. It was something deeper, a crack forming in her understanding of the universe. She had always believed emotions were a weakness, yet humans did not seem weak. In fact, they seemed stronger together. An evening of reflection. Back at the facility, Kathiri sat alone in her quarters, reviewing the day's observations. She had witnessed smiles, laughter, touch, and physical affection. Things that had no place in Ticora society. And yet, humans thrived with these behaviors. She could not deny their efficiency as a species. Despite their chaotic nature, their civilizations had flourished. They had achieved technological advancements, space travel, and cultural diversity. Could emotions be more than just a distraction? Could they be an advantage? Kathiri stared out the window at the stars. She had come to Earth thinking she would study a lesser species. But now she was starting to wonder. What if humans were more advanced in ways the Ticora had never understood? Kathiri had spent days observing humans, trying to understand their ways. Their emotions confused her, their constant talking puzzled her, and their physical affection shocked her. Yet, despite all her confusion, she could not deny one thing. Humans were fascinating. But nothing had prepared her for what she saw next. A quiet evening. One evening, Kathiri sat in the common area of the facility. Elias and Maria were nearby, speaking softly to each other. The Earth's sun had set, and the room was dimly lit with warm yellow lights. Maria sat on the couch, reading a book, while Elias worked on his computer. It was a peaceful moment, the kind of quiet efficiency that Kathiri found acceptable. But then, something unexpected happened. Elias looked up from his work, smiled, and leaned toward Maria. He gently touched her hand and kissed her forehead. Kathiri froze. Her black eyes widened in shock. What was this? Maria smiled at Elias, reaching up to touch his cheek. Her fingers rested there for a moment. And she whispered something that Kathiri could not hear. The moment was brief, only a few seconds, but to Kathiri, it felt like an eternity. Her mind struggled to process what she had just witnessed. She had seen affection before, hand-holding, hugging, even kissing among humans in public places, but this was different. This was not a grand display or an emotional outburst. It was quiet, simple, but deeply meaningful. And that unsettled her more than anything. Seeking answers, Kathiri stood up. She could not remain silent anymore. What was that? She asked, her voice firm. Elias blinked. What was what? That, she pointed at Maria's face. You touched her in a deliberate way. And you, she turned to Maria. You placed your fingers on his skin. Explain this behavior. Maria chuckled. It's just affection, Kathiri. Kathiri frowned. Affection. I have seen your kind hold hands or place lips together. But this was different. Elias leaned back in his chair, curious. How so? Kathiri crossed her arms. It was unnecessary. You were not in distress. There was no urgent reason to touch each other. And yet you did. Maria smiled softly. Because we love each other, Kathiri. It's not about need. It's about wanting to be close. Kathiri narrowed her eyes. Ticora do not require physical contact for emotional connection. Elias shrugged. Maybe. But we're not Ticora. Humans express love in many ways. Through words, actions, and sometimes just a simple touch. Kathiri remained silent for a moment. Then she asked, and what does this love achieve? Maria's expression turned thoughtful. It gives us strength. Kathiri frowned. Strength. Elias nodded. Yes, love isn't just an emotion. It's what drives us. It's what makes us fight for each other, protect each other, and build a future together. Kathiri's mind raced. Strength through emotion, through affection. This went against everything the Ticora believed. A memory from the past. For the first time in years, Kathiri remembered something from her childhood. She had been very young, studying in the Ticora learning chambers. Her mentor, an elder scholar, had once told her, emotions are a weakness. They cloud judgment and lead to failure. Kathiri had accepted that truth without question. All Ticora did. Their society was built on order, efficiency, and logic. Affection had no place in their world. But now, as she stood in front of these humans, she began to wonder, had the Ticora been wrong all along? An unsettling realization. That night, Kathiri sat alone in her quarters, staring at the small glowing screen of her data tablet. She had written dozens of reports about Earth, documenting human technology, behavior, and traditions. But this was different. She hesitated before typing her next entry. Observation. Human affection appears to be a source of strength, not weakness. Unlike Ticora, they use physical connection to reinforce emotional bonds. increasing unity and cooperation. Further study required. She stopped writing. Her fingers hovered over the screen. Did she truly believe this? Kathiri exhaled slowly. She had come to Earth expecting to teach humans about advanced logic and intellect. Instead, she was the one learning from them. And that realization terrified her. Kathiri spent the next few days in deep thought. The humans' ways confused her, yet she could not deny their strength. Their emotional bonds, once something she saw as a weakness, seemed to unite them in a way that defied logic. But her training told her that emotions led to irrational decisions. Could it be possible that the Tikora had misunderstood something fundamental about existence? She needed more answers. An unexpected invitation. One morning, Maria approached her with a warm smile. Kathiri, Elias, and I are going into the city today. Would you like to join us? Kathiri tilted her head. For what purpose? Maria chuckled. To experience Earth beyond the facility. You've died humans, but you haven't really lived among them. Kathiri hesitated. Her mission was to observe, not to participate, but something deep inside her, curiosity, urged her to accept. Very well. I will accompany you. Maria beamed. Great, you'll love it. Kathiri was not so sure. The chaos of the city. The human city was overwhelming. Buildings stretched toward the sky, metal and glass reflecting the sun. The streets were filled with hundreds of people, moving in all directions, talking, laughing, shouting. Vehicles rushed past, horns blaring. Kathiri's senses struggled to process the disorder. Their movements are uncoordinated, she muttered, watching the crowds. There is no clear pattern. How does this society function? Elias laughed. It's messy, I'll admit, but somehow it works. Maria led them through the streets, stopping occasionally to explain different things: restaurants, markets, street performers. Kathiri noted that humans thrived in this chaos, adapting without hesitation. It was inefficient, but strangely, it was effective. A strange moment. As they walked through a park, Kathiri's gaze fell upon a small child. The little girl, no more than 5 years old, ran ahead of her mother, laughing as she chased a floating bubble. Her movements were uncontrolled, her laughter bright and pure. Then, she tripped. Kathiri's muscles tensed. In Tikora society, weakness was met with discipline. The child had failed to be careful. Surely the mother would scold her. But instead, the mother rushed forward, crouched beside the child, and embraced her. Kathiri's breath caught. What was this reaction? The mother gently wiped the child's tears and spoke softly to her. The girl, still sniffling, nodded, and soon began laughing again, running forward as if nothing had happened. Kathiri turned to Maria. The child made an error. Why was she not reprimanded? Maria smiled. She's learning. Children aren't perfect. They need support, not punishment. Kathiri frowned. In my world, failure is corrected immediately. Elias folded his arms. And does that make your people stronger? Kathiri opened her mouth to respond, then stopped. Did it? She had never questioned it before. Tikora trained their young to avoid mistakes through strict discipline. Yet this human child had failed, and instead of punishment, she received comfort. And somehow, she had recovered faster than expected. This went against everything the Tikora believed. Was kindness a more powerful tool than discipline? She had no answer. The shocking rescue. As the group continued walking, a sudden scream split the air. Kathiri turned sharply. A child had fallen into a shallow river. Before she could react, a man, the child's father, rushed forward without hesitation. Without considering danger, he jumped into the water. Kathiri's eyes widened. What was he doing? The water was not deep, but the current was strong. The man reached the child, pulled him close, and fought against the rushing stream to return to shore. Within moments, they were both safe. Kathiri expected exhaustion, perhaps anger at the child's carelessness. Instead, the man held his son tightly, whispering reassurances. The child clung to him, shaking but unarmed. Kathiri couldn't believe what she had just seen. "You risk your lives for your young?" she asked Elias, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias nodded. Of course. Every parent would. Kathiri shook her head in disbelief. On Tikora, survival is individual. No one would endanger themselves for another. Maria placed a gentle hand on Kathiri's shoulder. But that's what makes us human, Kathiri. We don't just survive. We protect. We sacrifice. Because to us, life is precious. Kathiri had no response. For the first time in her life, she felt small. A shift in perspective. That night, Kathiri sat alone in her room, staring at the data tablet in her hands. Her thoughts were a storm of contradictions. She had always believed that logic and efficiency were the only paths to survival, that emotions made a species weak. But the humans, they were strong in ways she had never imagined. They loved, protected, sacrificed, and forgave. Could it be possible that the Tikora were wrong? Her fingers trembled as she typed. Observation. Humans value life above all else. Their emotions drive them to protect their own, even at great risk. What I once saw as weakness may be their greatest strength. She stared at the words, feeling something unfamiliar. For the first time in her life, Kathiri envied the humans. Kathiri could not sleep. She lay on her bed in the quiet darkness of her room, her mind filled with confusion and conflict. Everything she had seen in the human city, the affection, the sacrifices, the kindness, it all challenged the very foundation of her beliefs. For her entire life, she had been taught that emotions were a weakness, that survival was only possible through logic and discipline. But the humans, they were strong, but for reasons she could not understand. She turned onto her side, staring at the dim glow of her data tablet. The words she had written earlier stood out in the silence. What I once saw as weakness may be their greatest strength. Kathiri shut her eyes, but the thoughts would not stop. A morning of doubt. The next morning, Maria and Elias greeted her with their usual warmth. "Did you sleep well?" Maria asked, placing a cup of tea in front of her. Kathiri hesitated. "I did not." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Something on your mind?" Kathiri looked at them both. The way they smiled, the way they leaned toward each other, their hands brushing without even thinking about it. It all seemed so natural to them. Finally, she spoke. "I do not understand your kind." Maria smiled. "You're not the first alien to say that." Kathiri shook her head. "No, it is more than that. My people believe that emotions weaken a species, but humans, you are different. Your emotions make you strong. I have seen it." Elias leaned forward. "And how does that make you feel?" Kathiri opened her mouth to respond, but froze. How did she feel? She had spent her life analyzing facts, recording observations, and making logical conclusions. But this was different. She was feeling something, and she did not know how to process it. A test of trust. Later that day, Maria suggested they take a walk outside the facility. It was a bright, clear afternoon, with a gentle breeze moving through the trees. Kathiri had come to appreciate the beauty of Earth, though she still did not understand why humans placed so much value on it. As they walked, Elias suddenly stopped. "Hey, I have an idea." Maria looked at him suspiciously. "Oh no, what now?" Elias grinned. "Let's try a trust exercise." Kathiri frowned. "A what?" Elias gestured toward a small hill nearby. "It's simple. You close your eyes, fall backward, and let someone catch you." Kathiri stared at him. "That is illogical. Why would I deliberately fall?" Maria laughed. "It's about trust. You trust the person behind you to catch you." Kathiri folded her arms. "And if they fail?" Elias shrugged. "Then you hit the ground." Kathiri's eyes narrowed. This is a foolish exercise. Elias chuckled. Come on, Kathiri. Do you trust us? Kathiri hesitated. Trust. Another human concept she struggled to understand. The Ticora did not rely on others. They relied on themselves. But as she looked at Maria and Elias, both smiling, both waiting patiently, she felt something strange, a feeling she could not name. Slowly, she stepped forward. Very well. I will attempt this. Maria clapped her hands. Great. Close your eyes and fall backward. Elias will catch you. Kathiri took a deep breath. This is illogical, she told herself. This is foolish. She closed her eyes. And she fell. For a split second, fear gripped her chest. Her mind screamed that this was a mistake, that she was about to hit the ground. But then, strong hands caught her. Kathiri's eyes flew open. Elias stood behind her, holding her shoulders with a wide grin. See, he said, I told you we wouldn't let you fall. Kathiri quickly stepped forward, her heart pounding. She had trusted them, and they had not failed her. She did not know what to say. Maria smiled softly. Now do you understand? Kathiri looked at her hands. They were trembling slightly. Was this what trust felt like? The breaking point. That night, Kathiri sat alone in her room, replaying the moment in her mind. For the first time in her life, she had let go of control. She had allowed herself to be vulnerable. And the humans had caught her. Something inside her, something deep, buried, and long ignored, began to shift. Her whole life, she had been taught to be strong by relying only on herself. But now she realized, true strength comes from trusting others. Her hands clenched into fists. If this was true, then everything she had been taught about the Ticora way of life was a lie. She stared at her data tablet. For the first time, she hesitated before writing her report. Finally, she typed, Observation. Humans do not just survive alone. They survive together. Their strength is not just physical or intellectual. It is emotional. It is in their bonds, their trust, and their willingness to sacrifice for one another. Perhaps the Ticora have been wrong all along. She stared at the words, her mind racing. This was the most dangerous thought she had ever had. Because if she accepted it as truth, then she could never go back to who she was before. Kathiri stood by the window, gazing out at the Earth's vast, open sky. The sun was setting, painting the clouds with shades of red and orange. She had always found the sight beautiful, but now it felt more meaningful. The questions that had plagued her mind over the past few days seemed endless. What was strength? What was trust? And what made humans so different from the Ticora? She had come to Earth to observe, to study, to learn. But what she had discovered went far beyond any data or analysis she had ever made. Humans were more than their technology, more than their achievements. Their true strength was in their ability to care for one another, to trust, and to love. And that scared her. For the first time in her life, she felt as if her foundation, the core of her beliefs, was shaking. The growing doubts. The days following her experience with the trust exercise were filled with inner turmoil. Kathiri could not deny what she had felt when she had fallen backward into Elias's arms. The vulnerability, the trust, it had been so foreign to her, yet it had felt so right. Her mind told her to stick to what she knew, to trust only in logic, to rely on herself and herself alone. But her heart, which she had tried so hard to silence, whispered something different. What if the humans were right? That question repeated in her thoughts again and again. She knew the Ticora way of life. She knew their rules. But the humans, they were different. They didn't live by strict order and cold logic. They lived by a sense of community, of togetherness, and it made them stronger than anything Kathiri had ever imagined. She had seen their love, their sacrifices, their willingness to lay down their lives for each other. It was a strength unlike any she had ever known. And that truth, that humans were strong because of their bonds, Their emotions, their ability to trust one another, was slowly beginning to sink in. An unexpected conversation. One evening, Elias and Maria invited Kathiri to sit with them outside. The stars were visible now, glittering against the deep purple sky. Elias had a small fire burning in a pit, and the soft glow illuminated their faces. "Do you like it here, Kathiri?" Maria asked, her voice warm. Kathiri looked at the fire, trying to find the words. "It is different." She paused, struggling to express what she felt. "I came here to study your species, but I am not sure what I have learned." Elias raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Kathiri hesitated. "The Ticora believe that emotions are weaknesses. We believe in logic, efficiency, and discipline. But what I see in humans is different. You do not survive by your intellect alone. You survive by your connections to one another." Maria exchanged a glance with Elias, then turned back to Kathiri. "You're starting to see it, aren't you?" Kathiri nodded slowly. "Yes, I have seen how you care for each other, how you trust each other, how you sacrifice for one another. You are not just surviving, you are living together." Elias leaned forward. "We don't see it as a weakness. We see it as our greatest strength." Kathiri looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. She had spent so much of her life avoiding emotions, thinking they were unnecessary. But now she could not ignore the truth. She had never felt so connected to anyone. Not the Ticora, not her fellow travelers, not anyone. And the humans, they had shown her what it meant to truly connect. The breaking point. The next day, Kathiri went for a walk alone. She needed time to think, to process everything that had happened. She walked through the quiet wooded area near the facility, her mind racing. The questions were endless. Could she truly abandon the way of the Ticora? Could she accept that humans, who had no discipline, no cold efficiency, were stronger than her people? As she walked, she noticed a small group of humans gathered near a clearing. There was a woman holding a baby, an older man sitting on a bench, and a young boy running around. They were laughing, talking, living. Kathiri's chest tightened. She had never known such warmth, such connection. She stopped walking, watching them from a distance. The little boy ran up to the older man, who pulled him onto his lap and ruffled his hair. The baby in the woman's arms reached out and touched the man's face, and he smiled. It was simple. It was human. And it made Kathiri realize something. If the Ticora way of life was so perfect, why did it feel so cold? Why did she feel so empty? A choice to make. That night, Kathiri stood in front of the large glass window in her room once more, looking out at the stars. She had learned a lot about Earth and its inhabitants, but the biggest lesson had come from the humans themselves. She had spent her entire life believing that strength was about control, order, and survival through discipline. But she now realized that true strength wasn't in controlling everything around her. It was in letting go. It was in trusting others. It was in giving and receiving love. She was not Ticora. She was more than that. And the choice before her was clear. Kathiri could return to her people, to the cold, ordered life of the Ticora, or she could stay on Earth, among the humans, and learn to live a life built on trust, community, and emotion. The decision weighed heavily on her mind. And yet, for the first time, she felt something else. Hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could find a new path. Kathiri stood at the edge of the forest, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky with shades of pink and purple. She had always appreciated the beauty of Earth, but today, it felt different. Today, she was facing the most important decision of her life. Her mind raced as she thought about everything that had led her to this moment. The lessons she had learned from the humans, their ability to trust, to love, and to sacrifice for one another, had completely transformed her understanding of what it meant to be strong. For years, she had believed that strength came from control, from following the rules, from avoiding emotions. The T-Cora were efficient, disciplined, and powerful, but in her heart, Kathiri knew that something was missing, something essential. The humans, despite their chaos and imperfection, had shown her a different way, a way of connection and empathy. They had shown her that strength wasn't just about survival. It was about building bonds, about caring for others, and about trusting those around you. It was a strength Kathiri had never known. The offer. As Kathiri stood there, lost in her thoughts, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Elias and Maria approaching, their faces warm with concern. "Kathiri," Elias said softly, "we've been looking for you." Kathiri looked at them, her expression unreadable. "I needed time to think." Maria stepped forward. "We understand. You're facing a huge decision, and it's not easy. But we want you to know something." She paused, searching for the right words. "No matter what you choose, we're here for you." Kathiri's heart fluttered at the words. She had never heard anything like that before. The humans had never tried to pressure her into a decision. They had simply shown her the possibilities, a way of life she had never known, a way of being she had never considered. "What if I stay?" Kathiri asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I choose to live here with you? To embrace the way you live, to trust, to love?" Elias smiled, his eyes full of understanding. "Then you'll be one of us." Maria nodded. "We don't have all the answers, Kathiri, but we've learned that the strength to move forward comes from each other. And we believe you'll fit right in." Kathiri felt something shift inside her. The walls she had built around herself, walls that had once felt so necessary, began to crumble. A moment of clarity. Kathiri closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The decision wasn't easy, and the fear of the unknown still lingered. She had been trained to be a certain way, to believe that emotions were something to control and suppress. But everything she had seen on Earth, everything she had experienced with the humans, told her otherwise. She thought about the time she had spent with Elias and Maria, about the way they cared for each other, how they trusted each other without question. She thought about the way the humans had embraced her, even though she was different, even though she came from a completely different world. In that moment, Kathiri understood something she had never understood before. It was okay to be vulnerable. It was okay to trust. It was okay to need others. And it was okay to choose a different path, even if that meant leaving behind everything she had known. The T-Cora might have seen her decision as a weakness, but Kathiri didn't care anymore. For the first time in her life, she was choosing to live rather than merely survive. A new beginning. "I've made my decision," Kathiri said, turning to face Elias and Maria. Her voice was steady, but there was a softness in it she had never allowed herself to show before. Elias smiled warmly. "What have you decided?" Kathiri looked out at the horizon, her heart pounding. She felt the weight of the moment, but also the hope that filled her. "I want to stay. I want to learn how to live like you, to trust, to love, and to be a part of something bigger than myself." She took a step toward them. "I want to be human." Maria's eyes sparkled with joy. "You already are, Kathiri." Elias reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Welcome to Earth, then." In that moment, Kathiri knew she had made the right choice. A new chapter of her life was beginning. The future ahead. Over the following weeks, Kathiri immersed herself in life with the humans. She learned their customs, their language, their ways of connecting with each other. And with each passing day, she felt herself changing. She was no longer the cold, distant observer she had once been. She was becoming a part of something bigger, something beautiful. She was learning to trust, to care, to love. There were challenges, of course. She still struggled with the old ways of the T-Cora, their strict discipline and cold logic. But with Elias and Maria's support, Kathiri learned that she didn't have to choose between who she had been and who she could become. She could be both. The human way was not perfect, but it was filled with something the T-Cora could never understand: the power of human connection. Kathiri was no longer just an observer. She was a part of this world, and she had never felt more alive. As she sat with Elias and Maria one evening, watching the stars together, Kathiri realized something. She had come to Earth searching for answers, but what she had found was far greater than anything she could have imagined. She had found her place, and for the first time, she truly felt at home.